Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. I'm delighted to have Angela here starting a new series, a 10-part series on polymaths. And this is the the first episode. And I'm delighted to have, to welcome Angela and her guests, Eric and Dustin. Take it away, Angela.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. I'm really excited for this 10-part series. And I thought a good way to start it out, these 10 different meetups on polymathy for Polymath Sundays would be to discuss, how does one become a polymath? And some of you may be wondering, well, what is a polymath? What are we talking about here? It's not many mathematics. That's not what the word means. It means someone with many learnings. And it's also been called like a Renaissance person or polyhistor, multi-potentialite. There's different ways of saying it. I use polymath because that's the word I prefer. I do want to point out, though, that polymathy exists on a spectrum. So it's not as if you have to be a Leonardo da Vinci to consider yourself a polymath. It exists on a spectrum and on a range. A good definition from academia that I like would be, and by the way, there is no agreed upon definition, but Robert Root Bernstein, who I consider kind of the forefather of polymathy studies, has proposed this definition. Active engagement in multiple interests or endeavors, integrating vocations with avocations, so work with hobbies, simultaneously or serially across the lifespan. So basically, this is someone who is interested in learning and experiencing and having the full human experience, who's very open to experiences, more than a dabbler. Also, I want to point that out, that there really is some breadth, but depth also. And so that's what it is, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Hopefully that's of interest to you. I want to transition now to a personal story that involves ERIC Trulles, who is one of our special guests today. In 1999, I went off to college at the University of Southern California. And I should share with you, up until that point, I had been in private Christian schools in a kind of a bubble in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I had always, I was 18, I had always lived at home, always been in Christian schooling. And then off I went to this top tier, massive university in Los Angeles by myself. And as fate would have it, I signed up for a freshman seminar. I see Eric smiling there. I signed up for a freshman seminar called Self-Expression and the Arts. I don't know, just a little extra fun class. I don't even think there were grades. It was just really for fun. And Eric, in a second, I'm going to want you to tell a little bit about your background and why you started facilitating those seminars. But the impact of that freshman seminar is why I'm here today, really, because what Eric did is he created a competition, and I love me a good competition, I guess, but the goal of the Culture Vulture competition was each week to try as many new things as possible, and then each week we'd come to the classroom, and Eric, we'd each share all the things we tried that were new in that past week. We'd tally them up, and Eric, every week, he kept a tally. And whoever had the most points at the end won this competition and got a special prize. And it turns out I really took that competition very seriously. I really was like, I am going to try things. And it was exciting. Once I started trying all these new things, I loved it. I mean, I remember, Eric, I don't know if you probably don't recall this. It was so long ago. But that semester, I had a friend in college there who wanted to get a piercing. And he didn't have a car. So I was like, oh, I'll drive you to Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood and take you to a tattoo shop so you could get a piercing. And once we arrived there, he was like, why don't you get something pierced? And I hadn't even thought about it. And then I thought, well, it would be something new. So maybe I'll do it. And I ended up getting my tongue pierced because I was like, oh, it won't scar my face. But just any opportunity, whether it was trying sushi or Indian food for the first time or skydiving. I mean, there were so many things I did that semester, and it blew my mind how much richer my experience of being a human being was when I lived life looking for variety and newness. And that, not that that made me a great polymath, but it planted a seed that made me realize how wonderful life could be when you're just open to the full human experience and really kind of curating thoughtfully your own your own experience. So that planted the seed, which later led to my doctoral dissertation on modern day polymaths. So that's how I know Eric, and that's why I've invited him here, because he really had a significant role in planting the seed that sort of directed how some of my path in life had gone, and also my love for travel, and so many things just sort of came out of that that semester. So Eric, tell us a little bit about you, and Dustin, I promise we'll get back to you. But Eric, can you tell us a little bit about you, your background, your eclectic background, and also what inspired you to create that freshman seminar?
Well, that's quite an introduction. I greatly appreciate it. It makes me think that my life has been polymathic, meaning that I've done many, many different things. I was a USC professor for 31 years, but I never aspired to be a USC professor. So at this point, now that I'm retired since 2017, turns out that being a professor at USC was one of the many things I've done in life. During the time that I was a USC professor, I was a USC professor, but I even knew that that was one of the many things I've done. At one time, I was a young man growing up in the suburbs of New York City, as conservative as Angela was in Christian school. I didn't go to Christian school, but I was a nice Jewish boy growing up in New York, expected to be their son, my parents' son, the doctor, as all the rest of my Jewish friends were. Many of them did become doctors and lawyers and Indian chiefs, all the things they were supposed to. I was a rebellious sort, and I became an artist in a very unconventional way. I did everything unconventionally, and I didn't conform, and I had a strong, independent, rebellious streak in me. I never aspired to be a doctor or a college professor or anything conventional. And I became, in a very unpredictable, unknown way to myself, a modern dancer, a professional clown. I ran for mayor of New York City as a clown. I founded and directed New York City's resident clown troupe for 7 years, from 1977 to 1982. I ran against Ed Koch as mayor of New York City. I finished 5th out of 4 candidates, I say. Ed was very nice to my clown troupe. We went to Holland, Switzerland, and France. I never expected to be a clown when I was growing up in New York, or a modern dancer before that. I came to Los Angeles in 1982. I aspired to be a Hollywood actor for a little while, but I was mostly unemployed like most actors. I didn't like that. I joined the LA theater scene. I met a playwright. I directed his play. He was a playwright teacher at USC, became the dean. He offered me a job teaching improvisation at USC. I was hired there. I was teaching 5 improvisation classes. I was soon doing solo performance, writing autobiographical shows and helping my friends. And then it became my specialty in Hollywood and Los Angeles. And then USC started what they call the flagship program at the university, offering freshman seminars that allowed established professors to teach anything they wanted to incoming freshmen that was sort of out in left field, or so they could have physics teachers teaching comic books, or medical professors teaching the Beatles in 1960s. And I taught a course called that I made up. I made up all my courses. I never studied with anybody. I taught improvisation because I was an improvisatory dancer. I taught solo performance because I discovered how to make it up. So all my courses were about creativity and self-expression, because that's what I wasn't growing up, like Angela and a lot of us in high school. And our parents wanted security for us, and they didn't know who we were. And that's what became important to me. Who was I? What was inside me that I needed to let out and become? So I became an artist, a modern dancer, a clown, very expressive. I wanted to teach this class to probably inhibited freshmen who didn't know who they were on what was Los Angeles creatively, what could they discover, and what could they discover about themselves. So I didn't take that competition seriously, a culture vulture competition. I just said, dye your hair blue and you get a culture vulture point. Pierce your tongue, you get a culture vulture point. Try sushi for the first time, you get a culture vulture point. But people like Angela took the competition seriously, and she tried a lot of things, and people discovered ballet and the city of Los Angeles and sushi and tongue piercing and blue hair, and great. And one became a polymath and taught me what polymathy was. And that's what teaching is too. It's like planting a seed and watching it grow beyond the classroom into a wild weed, or a beautiful tree, or a garden, or a field of polymathy that I never heard of. So that was all interesting, and that's sort of a roundabout way of my background, along with being a screenplay writer and a poet and a solo performer and a podcaster. Late after I retired, one of my students said, why don't I turn my blogs and my travel writing into a podcast on travel? So I did that, and it's called E-Travels with E-Trules. You can find it on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher and Spotify and all these things. And if you Google me, erictrules.com or Eric Trules, you can find tons of stuff with me. I've been an artist for 50 years. And now I'm the father of an adopted Indonesian boy from Sumatra, because I married an Indonesian woman. I got married for the first time at 54 years old. So I've lived a life very off the beaten track. And that's why I say I'm sort of a polymath, creative, make things up as they come along. I never could have planned my life. Like John Lennon says, life is what happens while you're waiting for your plans to work out, So just got to say yes to the opportunities that come along. I did a TEDx talk called The Train of Opportunity, which is about jumping on the train of opportunity that stops at the station every day of your life, instead of being fearful about taking advantage of opportunities that come along in your life. I've said, and I encourage people to say yes to the opportunities. It's scary. Life is opportunity and challenging, but I'll stop there for a moment.
Eric, isn't one of the basic tenets of improv the yes and?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
I feel like that's how you live your life, and how you encourage other people to live their lives, is with a yes
true.
and.
It has consequences. You don't plan for the future very well. You live in the moment. So if you keep on coming up to the plate, using a baseball metaphor, and making the best choices you can, hopefully things will work out. You don't have the most security like my friends, the doctors and lawyers, have, but they got married and divorced many times, and you don't know what life is not a guarantee.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Eric. If you don't mind, I just want to switch gears a little bit and introduce Dustin, and then we can have more of a conversation.
Of course.
So Dustin, everybody, I just met Dustin fairly recently.
Yeah.
A few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, something like that. Through you found me on LinkedIn. Actually, Dustin, how did you find me?
That person I mentioned at the beginning, she actually told me about your studies and Michael Araki's studies, and so I found you through her. Then I read your dissertation as well.
Awesome. Yes, for anyone here who's not familiar, I wrote a doctoral dissertation on the lived experiences of modern day polymaths, and it's available for free online. If you Google, in pursuit of polymaths, you'll find it on ResearchGate. So I met Dustin just recently. He has a Polymath PolyCast and had me on as a guest recently, and I just loved our conversation. It was
fun.
He really is just as passionate about this stuff as I am. So and I'm so glad we've met. Dustin, tell us about yourself and tell us about your Polymath podcast.
Yeah. So all in all, something that Eric said that I really like too is that saying yes to opportunities. I think that the people that are polymathic are the opportunists in life. And when the opportunity arose at the beginning of this quarantine to have interviews, I decided to go all in. And so since around May, I've had 67, 68-ish people on my show. And ironically, the interviews are actually just a subset of my content. So my background has always been rather polymathic. Even at first, my first job, I had 7, 8 jobs at once, positions there, from swim instructor, lifeguard, personal trainer, water breaks instructor, even barista and escape room game master at other places as well, all coming together to have 2 or 3 jobs at once. This gave me a taste of what could be done as kind of a jack of all trades, which is another term people identify as. Over time, I realized I needed more competency and to become more myself, so I aspired to learn a lot more. I created Poly Innovator, which you can see in my name there, to be an aspiring polymath of innovation, someone who can make a change in the world, and this led me to creating content online, videos, blogs, and podcasts. All in all, the Omni content and the Polymath PolyCast are my 2 main things that I do. The Polymath PolyCast is what Angela mentioned earlier, where I interview people like everyone here essentially and have people like Angela on the show and talk about their multidisciplinary lifestyle and learn about what makes them tick. And one thing I love about the show is that most shows focus on just one thing about someone's life and niche down to that one thing. Whereas this one, I try to exemplify all the little areas, all the different hands in the various different cookie jars. Other than that, to pursue that self-education that I wanted to do, I created what I call a modular degree, a self-curated list of online resources for education, creating a baseline for a polymathic education. And so akin to what Angela said as well, polymathic education would mean a lot of different areas going into a lot of different learnings. And I love this whole idea of a spectrum that she mentioned earlier. And I've been working on a multidisciplinary spectrum using all these different terms people use: multi-potentialite, jack of all trades, polymath, creative polymath like Eric, and putting it all into a nice cohesive flow.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Dustin.
Thank you.
And I'm so glad. Can I just share with you guys, my dissertation was the first, and as far as I'm aware, only doctoral level dissertation on polymaths. And strangely, well, not strangely, actually, in academia, there's actually been very little research done on polymathy. And I'm sure Eric, coming from a university, actually USC is a little bit different than most other universities, but what it means in academia when you get a doctorate, like I did, is that you become highly, highly specialized in one thing. So because I am specialized in not being specialized. So it was like rebellious of me to study what I studied in the context where I did. So keep in mind, there are very few scholars who have researched or written about this in academia. Also, there have been a number of books that have come out last year. Range by David Epstein, Range: Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. There's The Polymath by Waqas Ahmed. Like, I feel between my dissertation and several other, and there are a few other books as well, but there has been a bit of a shift in the appreciation for this way of thinking and being, especially lately. I think technology plays a part in that, plus people's desire to kind of just live life fully. And a lot of people, in order to feel like they're having the full human experience, don't want to feel like they're a cog in a wheel. And so they want to forge their own paths. So my point of all of this is just to say, I am so happy and relieved when there are other thinkers and movers and shakers joining this discussion, because for a long time, for the past 5 years, it felt very lonely, actually, for me to be thinking and writing about this topic. So I'm very grateful for Dustin starting his podcast. Okay, with that said, I'd like to shift our discussion now, Eric and Dustin, to, in your opinion, what does it take to become like a polymathic person? And I'll start off with just a few characteristics that I heard from the people I interviewed as part of my study. Learning is critical for polymaths. That it means many learnings. That's what it means. So what I discovered is that being self-directed in your learning is really important. To be truly a polymathic person exploring your authentic self, you're not just going to want to live life where people inform you what you must learn. Like there's a real following of your own curiosity, being driven by your own curiosity and your self-directed lifelong learning. Obviously, having multidisciplinary knowledge, whether it's informed by your professional life or from your hobbies, you are not a narrow specialist. There is a real desire for breadth. And also, like I said before, there's some depth too. It's not just like you have shallow knowledge, but you have breadth and depth. And also that allows you to be creative because you can do analogical thinking, apply lessons, tools, approaches from one domain to another. You can see the bigger picture, build bridges, see linkages. So those are some of the types of thinking that polymaths engage in. I want to say too, a lot of time, and by the way, forgive me, I promise I'm not going to talk too much more, but I just kind of want to set the stage for what I think it takes to become a polymath or to express your inner polymath even more than you already do. Is just a few more things. So those are how people tend to learn and think. But one of the things I want to point out is that even though polymath means many learnings, and you may think it's resigned only to the intellectual world and what you can learn, in my opinion, and there's been very little discussion about this among the thinkers in this field, but to me, and Eric, you would probably appreciate this, there's something valuable about experience. Not just knowledge, but experience, broad exposure to different types of experiences. For me, I love to travel. I know, Eric, you do too. I've been to 40 countries on 6 continents, and I have learned so much about the world and about myself by traveling and literally seeing as much of the planet as I can. And while I'm at it, having broad experiences while I'm in these other countries doing cool things. But there's something valuable, not just about information. Some polymaths may read 1,000 books and become a polymath that way, but there's another way too. Like it doesn't all have to be information. It can also, there's a way of being polymathic through experience. So I just want to point that out. A few other traits that polymaths tend to have based on my research. They value freedom. You can see that, right? Like they want to explore. They value authenticity. They don't want to be fake, living someone else's version of what their life should be like, right? Creativity is huge. That is really the superpower of a polymath, is because they have this large toolkit when it comes to solving problems, or not even solving problems, but just living life and creating new things. They have more tools to help them be creative. So in a complex modern world like we're in today, where we need creative solutions, polymaths may be more important than ever. Being brave, because we live in a society that says be a specialist, fit in the box. If you don't follow that narrative, you have to be brave to live life on your own terms. And at the end of the day, this is a way of living life, you know, living life all in. That's the way I would describe it. Living outside the box. The box came up so many times in my interviews, about breaking out of the box, thinking outside the box, living outside the box. So I don't know what people make instead of the box. Maybe it's some box fort with lots of different elements. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out. But living outside the box is definitely another element. So if you want to be polymathic, like break outside of whatever box you may be trapped in and like make up your new box fort or whatever. Another common thing I heard was that if you have a lot of tools in your toolkit, when you meet someone new or you just have friends in your life, it's easier to find common ground with people, as opposed to if I only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, for solving problems, it's kind of like that with connecting with people too. Like if I can only talk about, I don't know, tree botany, then when I meet people, like, what am I going to connect with them on? But when I've got all these different areas of expertise and exposure and experience, then of course, when I meet people, we can find common ground. And that was something I definitely heard from a lot of my interviewees. I would say also just feeling unique, feeling special, feeling singular, feeling your ownliness is a part of it too. And Eric, you said it earlier, being rebellious. So there is a sort of, I said brave, but there's also kind of rebelliousness. So those are the ingredients, in my opinion, that if you want to become a polymath, if you want to explore, those are some of the traits that you would exercise and express. Of course, being very open. I didn't say that, but that's obvious. Being open to experience is critical as well. So I just spoke at length. I want to move this forward, but Eric, Dustin, what in your experience and in your opinion are the necessary ingredients to live life in this way that we're talking about, in a polymathic way?
Thanks. I promised to answer that, but I felt remiss in not answering where I got culture vulture from, because you asked that before.
Yes.
And it was, I want to give credit to my mom. When I was a kid growing up in New York, she used to call our trips to Broadway from Long Island to see My Fair Lady, Oliver, Bye Bye Birdie. She and my dad always took us to Broadway shows, to museums. Those were what she would call our culture vulture trips. So when I wanted to expose my students, who were sort of like my children at the time, I have a Facebook group called Trules' Children, because before I got married and adopted my boy, I actually have a son now, but my students were sort of like my children. So I wanted to expose my children's students to culture. And that meant the possibility of dyeing their hair and trying new foods and having them see shows and theater and dance. And I gave credit and a shout out to my mom and my dad, who had given it to my sister and I.
Oh my gosh,
Okay.
Thank you for sharing that. I love that.
Okay. And now to, this is such a parallel in my life, because I told you I never heard of polymath. It sounds like such an intellectual academic term, which I believe it is. You did a doctoral paper on it. You maybe made it up. But every word in the list that you said are the very words that I have spent a lifetime and my predecessors used to define the word artist. Every one of them. I think the way you are using the same words, I'll mention them in a second, are not exactly the same as artist, but they are exactly equivalent. I don't think every polymath is an artist the way you've just described them. But maybe if the terms of the definitions could be equivalent. Openness, freedom, my favorite word in the English language, authentic, creative. You use bravery, I usually use courage. People who have courage are not always brave. You make yourself do something that you're intensely afraid of. Soldiers in battle and artists who get themselves on the stage or to present something in public, from Judy Garland and Frank Sinatra, who were renowned for vomiting before they went on stage. They were so afraid. To every painter or artist who presents new work in public, it's terrifying. To live outside the law, Bob Dylan said you had to be honest. To not go to a conventional job where everything is secure and defined for you is scary. To face the blank page every day as a writer is terrifying. It's much easier to clean up the house and do errands than to face the empty page. So courage is pretty essential to an artist. I can't read this, to live outside the box. That is the definition of where an artist lives. I did a film. I didn't mention that I was a documentary filmmaker for a time in my life. Most of the work I do as an artist is autobiographical, solo performance, stories about my life. I did a film called The Poet and the Con. It was a story about my relationship with my criminal uncle, who was a criminal in every sense of the word and spent most of his adult life in prison. But my film was, why did a middle-class college professor at the time, me, identify with my uncle who broke the law as a burglar and a robber and was on America's Most Wanted list as a murderer? Why did I identify with him? And why is being an artist like being a criminal? And how did they both live outside the law and outside the norms of society? It's called The Poet and the Con, and I came up with some interesting parallels between the artist and the criminal. And the other word that you mentioned last on your list was unique. I think for an artist to be an artist, he has to find a unique voice and a unique way to define themselves and market themselves and succeed. So all these things, all these definitions were unique terms and vocabulary words and definitions of what it meant to be an artist. And to hear you use each of them to define a polymath, there must be something parallel and equivalent, but not the same, because I don't believe that every polymath, from knowing you and your presentation, and they could be different. Not every polymath is an artist. Maybe every artist could be a polymath, I don't know, but the definitions being so parallel. I'd like to talk about travel at maybe another moment, but not right now. I'll leave this right here.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so interesting. You know, I've never really thought about, and I've thought about this topic a lot, but I've never really thought about artists compared to polymaths. But I will say, and I know I've shared this, by the way, I have a Facebook group for anyone who's interested called Polymaths Place. And by the way, the reason I created that is because I learned it's not easy necessarily being a polymath. It's hard to find a place in a community. So there is a place. Come join us at Polymath Place on Facebook. Okay. And also a YouTube channel by the same name if you'd like to learn more about the topic. But my point is, I have said, and I do believe that our lives should be our art. Our greatest artistic expression is the very lives that we live and how we choose to live them out, how we choose to curate our own identities. And my hope is that people think about their own identities like that. Like, I can be a creator of myself. I can actually, in a way, give birth to myself, right? So that's the way I like to think about it, that our lives are our most important artistic project. But that's a great point, Eric, that, you know, there are some parallels, maybe some differences too, between how an artist, but so many commonalities. I can see that the descriptions and the words that I chose to describe polymaths would also apply to artists, for sure. Okay, Dustin, how about for you? Like, when you think about what are the essential ingredients for someone who's wanting to live their life as a polymath? Either in response to something I've said or Eric, or just something you want to add that I didn't say, like what comes up for you?
Something does come up for me, and that's curiosity. But before I touch on that, I want to kind of respond to Eric's thing there, because I don't think, I agree with him. I don't think that polymathy is solely the creative or the artistic, although most artists are most of the time nonconformists. They want to do their own thing. And because of that, it gives people the opportunity, saying yes to that opportunity, and to indulge into learning new things, which I believe is key to have that courage, like he said, to learn, more importantly, and more importantly, master those new areas. So I think polymathy is a level of competency. And the term that came up for me on my show a lot was curiosity, and having that innate, or rather cultivated as a skill, curiosity to learn new things and want to learn new things.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And Dustin, tell us a little bit about for your own personal journey. Eric shared some of, of his eclectic background and the things he's done. And you shared a lot about what you've done related to polymathy. But for example, I know that you come from a multicultural family. I do too. My mother's an immigrant from Cuba. You have a parent who's Mexican, right? Like, tell us more about your unique combination and what you think helped you explore your own polymathy.
Yeah, so my mom always helped me indulge in my curiosity. She would have a statue of Ganesha on the coffee table and have this kind of idea of Hinduism there, but we grew up Christian because this is where we are in the Bible Belt. And then on top of that too, just being exposed to many different cultures around me, growing up with Hispanics and Mexicans in particular, gave me a culture shock, if you will. It's not too much different, but still interesting to see something new and learn Spanish from a young age. And I was talking to Shukrant earlier about this as well, where I love languages. He was saying he can't identify my accent too well. And it's because most people can't either. People say his German and Spanish, and I have all that in my DNA. And I think that too, entrepreneurship is another area where a lot of polymaths thrive, where when you are an entrepreneur, you have to be someone who is a jack of all trades or wear many hats in your company. And so from a young age, I always kind of identified as an entrepreneur. So I actually had my own business selling temporary tattoos of all things when I was 10. And then growing up saying I want to be a CEO, and then eventually CEO of an international company driven to innovate technology and ideology. And those were the words that were coming out of a teenager's mouth.
Wow, I love that. I want to touch upon, you said entrepreneurship, and I just want to say that fits very much with what I heard from the polymaths I interviewed, because typically organizations, when you work for someone else, a company or a person or whatever, they typically have a pretty narrow view of what a job is. And so as a polymathic person, it can be quite frustrating when you have all these capabilities and capacities and all this stuff to be sort of put in that little box of that role. And even when you apply for jobs frequently, we're taught to put on your resume the specific, whatever just matches that job, not everything. So we kind of start off dishonest, actually. We're taught to sort of censor ourselves and what we bring to the job to match what we think they're looking for. And so that can be very frustrating for polymathic people who want to actually use their capacities and their intelligence to be put in that little box and only be able to use a portion of your capacities at work. I heard from one polymath too that it was the opposite for her. Vast majority felt like organizations don't appreciate me, they don't understand me. One of my participants said, they overtask me. They know I can do everything and they just won't stop tasking me. Please, just because I can do all that doesn't mean I should do all that. So that happened for one of my participants. But the point is, for most polymaths, it's hard to fit in organizations. By the way, I have a book coming out next year called Polymaths and the Business Organization. It's going to be published by Business Expert Press, precisely to try to help business leaders appreciate and leverage and tap into the many talents that polymathic people can bring to their teams, because it's a real problem. Organizations, for the most part, don't even kind of recognize that there's a range and there's different ways of being and thinking and different strengths that polymaths versus narrow specialists bring, or that different positions are more suited, like depending on the nature of the job, that there is a kind of bifurcation about, is the job more suited to a polymath or a specialist? So that's going to be coming out. The point is, just to bring this home, many polymaths decide to become entrepreneurs so they can use their full talent, so they can use that toolkit. And so that is quite common. It's also difficult too, because being an entrepreneur has a lot of risk, a lot of challenges, a lot of work. The kind of security that you get from a regular 9-to-5 may not be there if you're an entrepreneur. So, so Dustin, you were a kid entrepreneur, it sounds like. I love that you had your own little temporary tattoo business as a child.
Even having a stand on a festival, Earth Day festival downtown.
Oh, wow. I love that. Oh my goodness. Okay. So it sounds like for you, I heard curiosity, I heard entrepreneurship, I heard your multicultural exposure. Yes, that all fits with what I know. Eric, you had wanted to talk about travel. Maybe we can shift gears a little bit more and talk about travel. I love travel. What comes up for you? Like, why is travel important in living a good life?
I would try to think about it in terms of polymathy.
Hmm.
It certainly has to do with curiosity.
Hmm.
Um, I think for me, travel is not vacation. Um, it has to do with my curiosity about history and how different human beings have lived throughout history and how they live now. It has to do with expanding my knowledge and experience beyond my American one. The last thing I would like to do when I travel is to stay at a Marriott and eat McDonald's. I think that some people would call that travel. I would call that a waste of travel. Uh, I think the least interesting place to travel to in our country is Disneyland or Las Vegas, which are probably the most popular places to travel to. They are the easiest and most well marketed. At Disneyland, you can go see the rhinoceri of Sumatra in mechanical recreated technologies. In Las Vegas, you can go see the Eiffel Tower and the Empire State Building instead of going see the Eiffel Tower or the Empire State Building. Uh, okay, now you can go to now if you really want to stop doing that, you can go to New York and Paris and see the Eiffel Tower and the Empire State Building and stay in the Marriott and eat McDonald's. That's really a bad idea too. Uh, so to look at it more positively, why not go to New York or Paris or much further, much wider to the French countryside or to the Sumatran outback and maybe not even stay in a hotel, but okay, you could stay with an Airbnb recently. And there's an organization called Servas, Servas. Most people have never heard of it. It's been, existed since the late 40s. It was founded by an American expatriate living in Italy. And there's branches all over the world. Our branch in America is called usservas.org. And there's an organization dedicated to world peace. Uh, that sounds nice, but on a practical level, voluntary travelers can join, be interviewed very easily, uh, and then get a host list of voluntary hosts in most countries all over the world and be able to stay 2 nights in the host's home for free, being treated like a family member. So I've been both a host and a traveler since the 70s. I have stayed all over the world for free. It's not a mutual exchange program. If I stay in, where are you right now, Shrikant?
New York,
Okay. Where'd you come from originally?
Bombay.
Okay. I have stayed in Servas homes in Mumbai, the current name of Bombay, and all over the world, in Tel Aviv, in Lima, Peru, all over the world. And those people are not obligated. I'm not, if I've stayed in their homes, I'm not obligated to host them, but I have hosted people from all over the world for free. And I have treated them like family members and they've treated me like family members, meaning I show them my city. I feed them meals when I can. And I open my doors and my life to them and my home and my city to them. And what a better way to see the planet than to go to Disneyland and to pay for expensive hotels and to follow a guide. It makes it personal. And I learn about how people live in their cities, their favorite places, their parks. I might take a picnic with them. I might go to their favorite restaurants. I eat in their homes. Uh, and that's what I'm interested to. I go to long houses in Indonesia and see how people used to live, how they really live. I don't go to the most popular tourist sites, although of course I'll go to uh, the most historical sites all over the world. I wouldn't want to miss those, and I pay the expensive tourist tickets when I have to because I want to see what existed historically. But travel is a way to broaden my perspectives and uh, realize that where I live, and America is not the center of the world, and that people all over the world do not see Donald Trump in America as the center of the world. They often don't think about my country and my president and my life at all. They think about their lives. And everybody's trying to put food on the table and raise their children in the best ways they can. Uh, and France and Italy and Indonesia and Peru and Scandinavia are so different and so amazing. And when people ask me what's my favorite and what's the best country and what's the best food, those are a little like the culture vulture competition. Who cares? It's not a competition. The world is wide and vast and interesting. And the history of Iceland and the food of Sweden is so different than that of Peru and Egypt and you name it. Everything is different and unique. And some tastes I like and others I don't. And there's no best. And the world is not a competition. And the most money is not the most important thing in the world. And it's nice to be welcome in Istanbul because it's a great city like New York. And it's not great to be treated like a dollar bill in Cuba because the people are so hungry there that they can only treat you like a dollar bill. And even though you have a reservation in their home, they will cancel the reservation and give it to somebody else they found that day because they can pay you more money. That's not good. The world is not, even when people are starving, there's some personal dignity and value system that's based on humanity and integrity. And that's one of the problems with our country. It's the biggest and best and richest, but our values are not good right now. And travel makes you see that and make you see things beyond your own limitations where you live, even your own family, your own religion, your own politics, your own king. And that's what's beautiful about travel, a way to connect and see how much more we have in common than all our differences.
Yeah, beautiful, Eric. I love that. The part about the commonality instead of differences. And I heard you say travel is a way to broaden our perspective. So anybody who wants to be more polymathic, travel is a great way to do that as well. And I love how you sort of describe, it's like having a sense of adventure and learning, and not in a fake plastic world, but really seeking out the real world when you travel places. I love that. Dustin, do you have any observations on any of this? Anything to add?
Yeah, so one of my main motivators to being polymathic is that there isn't much time in our we live long lives, 80 to 100 years ideally, but even that is a blip in the eye in the big picture of things. So why limit yourself to societal's definition of a normal life? If we want to diverge and do a whole bunch of traveling, which I love traveling too, so all three of us here, or probably most of us watching this, we all love to travel. But a prime example is New York, where our great host Shrikant is located. There are so many restaurants in the Isle of Manhattan that even if you were to eat at a new restaurant for every meal, every day for 50 years, you'll still not have enough time to experience all of them. And so that idea always makes me kind of have that existential terror. Like, hey, what am I missing out on? What could I explore and be curious about and go learn?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. We've got about 8 or 10 minutes left before we shift to Q&A. So I just want to shift gears a little bit and talk about, like, if you really want to live life in a polymathic way, if this resonates with you, if it fits with your values, or if you realize I've already been living this way and now I have a word for it, or now I have a better appreciation for it. I also want to just caution you, please don't take that the wrong way. I encourage everybody to live life on their own terms. And if this feels right and sounds exciting to you, do it. Like, curate your own experience. But it won't be without challenges. So let's shift gears a little bit in what time we have left before we shift to Q&A. And I want to hear for Dustin and Eric, and I'm happy to share some examples too. If you choose to live life outside the box, you know, living life on your own terms as a polymathic artist, what are some of the challenges you think people may have to, that they may experience that might be helpful to sort of be aware of?
Well, I would say people often think of us as unfocused or lack of motivation to finish something, but it comes down to this idea of dabbling and specialization. So one of the best specialists in the world, Roger Federer, across the pond over there, he specialized after he dabbled in 24 different sports, and he was experimenting with a whole bunch of different kinds and learning from each of these different sports. And I learned that in the great book of Range by David Epstein that Angela mentioned earlier. And it's interesting that a lot of the times people think they're unfocused. So jack of all trades, master of none. But the real saying is jack of all trades, master of none, but also sometimes better than a master of one. And that second half gets cut off a lot. And when you see that second half, well, maybe the potential of being polymathic could be better in some cases.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that, Dustin. Eric, what about for you? Have there been any challenges to sort of being this rebellious creative? And how did you navigate those challenges?
Life is a constant challenge. Comes with the territory. I don't know anybody's life who is easy. It's not somebody who's born with a silver spoon in their mouth and a lot of money. That's its own challenge. Life is challenging. You can't take anything for granted. My life has been extremely challenging. It's never been a lack of focus for me. I've always been very focused. My focuses have evolved in a polymathic way, often within the creative arts. That's the thing I needed to discover. I sort of exploded off the conveyor belt of conventional education to become a very unconventional modern dancer. I had to get out of my brain off of school and somehow erupted below the neck into my body and became a modern dancer and a clown and a theater artist and a solo performer and everything that I was not expected to do. But though each of those was a 7-year commitment, very focused, entrepreneurial. I founded my own companies. I had a hard time delegating. Not one of my strengths was to delegate. I formed nonprofit companies. I applied for grants. I was very self-directed and motivated. I never had any desires to marry or have a child or any conventional life. Very countercultural, late 60s. And here I am, over 70 years old, married with a child. That is quite a challenge. Never made any conventional choices to buy a house or build for that kind of future. Money was always a challenge. Financial and security are, well, I'm talking about the challenges of being an artist, which are some of those freedom, courage, unconventional. Those became the biggest challenges of my life. They always were. I was lucky. I was so focused that I always found a way to support myself. I got paid as a modern dancer. I got jobs in academia. I graduated college at 21 years old. A year later, without any training, I was teaching movement at Columbia College in Chicago at 22 years old because they didn't like the choreographer of my new dance company. I was teaching 20-year-olds when I was 22 at Columbia College in Chicago. That was bizarre and lucky. I was always teaching. It was, I had a predilection for it and I was lucky to be paid for it. I found a way to get grants. I had a nose for entrepreneurship and grants and finding a way to be an artist and make a living. But finances and security were always a challenge. I don't know if that would come with polymathy in general, but it came with being an artist. It was always a challenge. And the unknownness of a future, if you're always living in the moment and evolving from one career or one interest or one skill set to another, I would think would always be challenging. I know at universities now, they say they don't train you for a single job anymore. I taught at USC, the theater school, for 31 years. That they say is very unusual. But they don't train you or teach you or prepare you for one job anymore, or 5 jobs in your career. They train you for 5 careers. And I think you're lucky to have 5 careers. I know you graduate college and you're lucky not to move back into your parents' house and to have a job at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, speaking of finances, I found contradictory information, both from my participants and in the academic literature on this front, because some people, get financially rewarded from being highly specialized in one area for a very long time. They become the real experts, and so they can charge more money for their labor. And for other people, if they have more capacities and more talents, like they could also potentially make more money. So there was a little bit of a disconnect I found there. But what I heard, I just want to hone in on the money part here. There's something interesting I found in my research when it came to especially the upbringing of kids who became polymathic, and if you forgive me for any of those of you here who have heard me speak before, because you've probably heard me say this, but for those of you who are new to my work, I think this was one of the more interesting findings, which is that for some people, having a lot of financial resources helped develop their polymathy naturally. You can imagine, like, I have resources, I can pay for degrees, I can pay for travel, I can pay for classes and workshops and seminars and experiences because I have financial resources. So that makes sense. And you may think, well, that's just how it is. You have to have money to be a polymath, but that's not true. Because I heard from a number of people that it was precisely not having a lot of financial resources that forced them to have to learn more, because they can't outsource things. Like if you, or maybe you feel more pressure to have to get a job, and maybe it's a new kind of a job that you didn't have before, but it's going to pay. So you go and you do that for 7 years. And so there was this real interesting split that whether you have a lot of money or you don't have a lot of money, either way you could become polymathic, which I think is really interesting. And that was also true, by the way, for the kind of functionality in the family. So there were some people who were polymathic adults who had really healthy, normal, functional, stable upbringings, and they had parents who let them explore and supported discovering lots of things. And so that makes sense that having supportive parents could help someone explore their polymathy. But the opposite was also true, that having drug addicted, divorced, abusive, growing up in an environment with dysfunction really inspired those people to make a better way, to get a ticket out, to create capacity and intelligence and capability in themselves to find a better path to get out of a bad situation. So I think that's interesting, don't you? That regardless of how much money you have, or how kind of functional or not your upbringing, or even maybe your current life as an adult is, that either way you can become polymathic. I think that should give us all hope, if anything, that we can either use the resources we have or create resources to build the life we want to have. Okay. Well, guys, we have been at this for an hour. It's been such an interesting discussion. I think now might be a good time to actually, before we go on, let me just check my list here about the cons, what you should be aware of. Okay, yes, others may see you as uncommitted, flighty, distracted, even if you don't feel that way like Eric didn't. Others may see your multiple interests as negative somehow. You may not feel very well understood because you're so unique. How do you explain who you are? We just meet. I say, tell me about yourself. And it's like, one of the people I interviewed was, he had a PhD in physics researcher, physics professor. He was also a professional magician, covered in tattoos, refereeing women's roller derby, bartending. Like, how do you begin to describe your personhood? You know, you may have to kind of censor and give it out in little bits. So feeling like people might not really understand you because you're different, that can be a challenge. Yeah, so self-censorship can be difficult. Career changes can be difficult. You know, navigating professional life when you don't fit in that box that society tells you to fit in can be difficult. And organizations frequently
Just gonna
discriminate.
get a sip of water.
Okay, Eric. Organizations frequently do discriminate, and I use that word on purpose, discriminate against polymathic types, because the dominant ideology is that of specialization. So that can be a challenge you should be aware of. And we talked about, for those who pursue entrepreneurship, that can also be a challenge. So I think we pretty well covered, you know, the ingredients that it takes to live life in a polymathic way. I think we've covered some of the challenges that you should be aware of, and know you're not alone. We've also talked about Polymath's Place as some additional resources. You can go on Facebook or YouTube. So hopefully that's a good intro. Hopefully we got some, you know, intellectual stimulation and some interest, and hopefully you could resonate with what we were talking about in terms of how to become a polymath. Oh, Dustin has a community as well. Dustin, do you want to say anything about your community right now?
Yeah, just real quick. Essentially speaking, one of my motivations behind the Polycast was to interview a lot of people like yourself who've made your own pocket of polymaths, because I've met over a dozen different people with their own bits and pockets, like Polymath's Place or Polymath's Playground and Polymath Universities, who I had on last week. And it's interesting how all these different pockets are kind of isolated from each other. And I wanted to create this tribe of polymaths to unite all these different umbrellas. Not to take anybody away, but just to have another place for everyone to be together.
I love it. All right. And where can people go if they want to learn more about that?
I'll put a link in the description, but poly.tribe.show.
Awesome. Okay. So guys, Shrikant, is it okay for us to shift to Q&A at this point?
Yeah, let's do that. So let me introduce Q&As. Folks, we have 4 rules for Q&As. Number 1, type exclamation mark in your chat or raise your hand in Zoom in order to ask questions. Number 2, keep on topic. Number 3, be brief. Number 4, speak your mind. Feel free to disagree with anybody on anything and do so courteously. All right, those are the 4 rules. So it's going to be Joe, Michael, and Julie next. Joe, go ahead.
Hi to everyone. Thank you for your presentation. It was really fantastic. It was well done. One of the things that I've always had a question about with, and that was kind of come up, Angela, you had mentioned in the class that you had taken with Eric that there may not have been a grade. And one of the things that I've always wondered about is, how does a polymath define failure or success, in the sense that, you know, you're kind of getting used to being uncomfortable with doing new and different things all the time. So, you know, the idea of failure kind of changes. You know, do you really fail? You know, because you're attempting something new, and a new endeavor in and of itself, you're learning something, you're taking something away from that. So, you know, but there has to be some form of measurement that a polymath, you know, is, you know, but anytime you introduce that measurement, you're introducing certain types of constraints. So just basically, how does a polymath define failure or success.
Yeah. Guys, if it's okay, I'd like to respond to this, and then Eric or Dustin, if you have anything else to add. First off, Joe, good to see you. I love your question. And two things come to mind for me personally, and I think a lot of polymaths would agree. Because polymaths are very open, wanting to have the full experience, I think you could say that failure is not trying. Failure is being closed-minded. Failure is not being open to the life experience, the good, the hard, the difficult, the wonderful, all of it. Failure is not learning. You know, I think that that would be how a way of describing failure. And of course, the opposite, success, would be, you know, learning and experiencing, having the full experience, even the difficult stuff. So that's part of what comes up for me. I also, this is something I hadn't really thought of, but I feel is true. I didn't interview people about this, but I am pretty sure most polymathic types do not value what other people think quite so much as the average person. There's a real rebelliousness built in to living life this way. And so failure or success for me is what I think of me, what I think of my life, not what somebody else or society or my parents or my religion or whatever. The whole point of being a polymath is to live life on your own terms in a really, really kind of unique, self-curated way. So success or failure is less about the external judgments and more about the internal. Dustin or Eric, do you have anything to add?
I agree about 100%. I just have a couple of other notes to tell it from my own experience. That film I made about my criminal uncle and myself, I always remember his language for it. He used the prison analogy for self-validation. He said it's an inside job. You know, I think that means breaking out of prison or accomplishing the criminal job. It's an inside job. And I remember when computers first came out, I wanted to learn a word processing program. I was in my 40s. I lived in Santa Monica. I signed up for Santa Monica Community College, a Word Perfect program. Anyone remember Word Perfect? It was before Word. I was 40. All the kids were 18 or 17 or 21. I was the most active, aggressive, and participative student in class. I went to every class. I asked the most questions. I had no hesitation. I was not shy. I asked everything I wanted to know. I learned as much as I wanted to know. I learned how to use WordPerfect. I did not show up for the final exam. The teacher said, "I'm going to have to fail you, Mr. Trules." I said, "I don't care. I didn't come for the grade. I'm 42 years old. What would I care about the grade for? I learned WordPerfect. Thank you very much." I might have given her a gift. It's an inside job. I learned for myself. I'm retired. I listen to Audible. I listen to the history of Mesopotamia for 32 hours, to the history of, what's his name? The Mongol Empire. What's the most famous Mongol?
Genghis Khan.
Genghis Khan, 30 hours. I find it fascinating. My goal in life now, amazing I have a goal besides bring up my son and make my wife happy, is you name a year and I can tell you what happened at that time, every place all over the world. In the Western, Chinese, South America, anywhere, 1281, 1492, I'd like to do it. I have no chance to be able to do that, but I keep on absorbing a little bit more. And why? I'm just curious. I want to know how empires replaced each other and why, and what they learned and where the laws started and where farming started and how one idea started to replace the other for a better one. And You know, it's like that, the learning for oneself. The only other thing I could think, if sometimes one needs discipline and motivation, so I couldn't have taught Word Perfect myself. I don't think Angela could have been motivated to get on our polymath class without my class. So it's good to sign up for a class to learn the tools, get positive feedback from your teacher, and to get the satisfaction of your own learning. The class structure is there for a good reason, not to get the degree or get the good grade to please your parents or something. It's just a good structure to learn. You need a good teacher. There's so many. I signed up for editing at UCLA. I wanted to teach myself filmmaking. I was 40 something. Signed up with the head of the Hollywood Editing Association. He was German. I'll do a bad German accent. He showed us a Hollywood film he might have edited. He showed us 10 minutes. Afterwards, he said, "That's good editing." I said something like, "What the blank are you talking about?" He didn't teach us anything about editing. From that point, I stopped going to his class and I took a VCR, you know, the old VHS, and I stopped the VCR on every cut, you know, what a cut is, you know, on every edit. And I taught myself how to edit, because he wasn't a good teacher. He knew how to edit, but he had no idea how to explain it. You need a good teacher. Those are two different skills, being able to do something and how to teach something. So, okay.
Thank you, Eric. I want to make sure that everybody gets to ask their questions. So far we've got Michael, Julie, Mike, and Martin waiting. Michael, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for the panel. That was great. So my question was related to Joe, but I changed it up because I had a few different ones. So I'll just ask a separate one. I feel as if productivity is a prime element involved in becoming a polymath and becoming an effective polymath. So I'm wondering, as it relates to doubt, and this relates to the courage conversation that was during the panel, eliminating doubt I don't think is really possible, but to make it to such a small degree where we are following our mind and our hearts, and also, you know, so that's one thing, one piece of the question. And then the other piece is there are there strategies that you found in your research, Angela, that informed the inflection point of people not caring what others think, and kind of flipping the switch and really just leaning in and digging in deeply into many subjects suddenly, and you know, whether it was working on themselves and their shadow pieces, or some other strategies that informed them at a young age. So that's what I'd like to hear about.
Thank you, Michael. And Dustin and Eric, if it's okay with you, I'll again sort of give my response, and then if you guys want to add something. Regarding the productivity, so I studied elite, highly accomplished polymaths. They weren't creative, eminent geniuses like a Leonardo da Vinci, but these were real accomplished movers and shakers, because I wanted strong examples of polymathy, people with expertise in both the arts and the sciences and a real, you know, level of accomplishment. However, I don't want you or anyone else to think that that's the only way polymathy shows up. Someone could be polymathic by nature. And I know this is something that Michael Araki, who's a fellow scholar in this field, and I have sort of discussed, is, you know, someone could have a trait of being polymathy. Like I may have an inclination for polymathy, but not actually exercise it or pursue it. So that would be somewhere at the far end of the spectrum, where like I have the capacity, but I'm not really exercising it. And then at the far end, you know, are the eminent creative geniuses who are contributing in multiple fields at the same time and somehow seem superhuman. So productivity and effectiveness, you know, it can be used, I guess, to define where on the range someone may fall. But there's no real clear-cut cutoff for what makes someone a polymath or not. Michael Araki has also been working on an assessment, a trait personality assessment. But for right now, anyway, whether or not someone is a polymath or a polymathic person is sort of by self-identity. There's no Mensa, the High IQ Society for Polymaths. I will say time management came up quite a bit in my interviews, because for people who are highly accomplished and get a lot done, they have to be good at managing and juggling their time and their priorities and shifting gears. That came up quite a bit, as the switching, being good at switching. I also heard from them about feeling imposter syndrome. I didn't ask anything about imposter syndrome. It didn't even occur to me. And like almost half of my participants talked about feeling imposter syndrome because they're not narrow specialists only, because they have this breadth. They're kind of insecure sometimes about that when they compare themselves to someone who's been very narrow and dedicated and specialized. Strategies for not caring what other people think. I would say that the majority of the people, maybe everybody I interviewed, and for myself as a polymathic person too, there's a real hunger and a desire to live a good life, to kind of strive towards self-actualization, towards reaching your potential, learning as much as you can, contributing as much as you can, making a positive impact in the world however you can. And so if that is your, among your core values, that you want to live a good life and reach your potential, but you let what other people think of your life keep you from that, that's not good. So I would say one of the ways to care less about what other people think of your life journey and how you live your life and how you curate your own experience is to remember at the end of the day, like, you don't want to have regrets, right? Like, you want to feel like you lived all in. You want to feel like you reached your potential to the extent you could with the challenges and the resources that you had at your disposal. So that's something that comes up for me, is just remembering, like, we don't know if we get other lives. We know we have this one. And how can you make the most of it? And if you care too much about what other people think about how you live your life, you may not get there. You may not get to that end state that you're looking for. When you're on your deathbed and you look back, how did I do? Did I live it on my own terms? Was I brave? Was I courageous? Did I try hard? Did I forge connections and relationships and use my potential? Like, those are the kind of things that I want to feel like I did at the end of my life. So Dustin, Eric, do you have anything else to add on these questions?
Yeah, I got pretty excited about that question, actually, because I believe there's two paths to polymathy. You have something that Eric mentioned earlier, where having multiple different jobs over the time of your lifetime, but also doing everything at once. So someone who's a jack of all trades, they're often seen as like unfocused because they're just hands in so many different cookie jars. But I do think that if you are good at time management and can prioritize, and more importantly, switch between different areas, you can build up simultaneous pillars of knowledge throughout your life and then become a polymath by doing so, and just over time going down that spectrum. Versus some people, I think especially people who are older too, will find this out, like, hey, maybe I was actually polymathic because of this. Even if you stay with one career, or not one career, but one company, you end up having multiple careers in that company. You start out in entry level, then move up to middle management, maybe even executive, as well as many different horizontal jobs as well, which take different skills, and you become an expert in that skill, and over time become a polymath.
Next question is from Julie. Julie, go ahead.
Hi. I thinking back, I think I'm a natural polymath up until I was 14. I wrote books and plays, and I had so much promise, but I'm one of the people that fell hard at 14 and became very off track by caring too much what people think and conforming to society, and basically was stuck for 20 years. And then in my 30s, I was reading Tony Robbins, and he said, say yes to life. I had a partner. We were saying yes to life, and I started to return to that authentic state. And then I lost my partner, and lack of courage came in, and I felt very alone. And now I'm 60. I've done a lot of pursuing of my personality. My question is about, I found out that I think I'm an artist gone wrong as far as engrams go, because as a child I was naturally adventurous and not afraid. And I'm curious if you've done any research on like Myers-Briggs or personality types that are naturally polymaths?
Julie, thank you so much for sharing that about your story. There, in general, has been very little study on polymaths, and this is a glaring gap in the academic literature regarding what personality types tend to be associated. And regarding Myers-Briggs, quickly, because I'm familiar with that one, introverted, extroverted, I don't think there would be any preference. I think we would find introverted and extroverted polymaths. Sensing, wanting facts versus being more intuitive, I think that one could probably go either way. For polymaths who are really about wanting to know information and knowledge, they'd probably be more of the sensing type. But I think intuitive, go with the flow types could also be polymathic, maybe more artistic polymaths. Thinking versus feeling, I think there would probably be a preference for thinking, but I don't know. And then the judging versus perceiving, are you highly organized or you go with the flow? I think the accomplished polymaths who have a lot of resume progress would probably be more J's who, are organized, highly organized and get stuff done. But I think the kind of more artistic polymaths might be more of the perceiving type. But bottom line is we need more research, and that is an area that is missing right now.
Thank you. Next up is Mike and Martin. And then what we're going to do is we're going to break into small breakout rooms of about 5 to 6 people so we can discuss these ideas amongst ourselves in great amount of detail, sharing our own stories. And then we'll come back in these large groups and we'll be talking about our takeaways. All right. So let's keep these questions and answers brief so we can have time for both our breakout rooms and the takeaways, because we really want to hear what people are taking away from this meetup. All right, next up is Mike.
A comment for Dustin and a related short follow-up for Eric. Polymath hosting and travel. I admired Dustin's interview concept. I looked at your website, especially interviews tell me something that nobody else knows about you, and among other questions that he had. Now, the follow-up for Eric is I looked at the service application form. How do you convert the form, their application form, into an interview document so you get the right match for either for hosting or even for travel? Can you say that in 2 sentences?
It's Mike, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Mike, I'm not a Servas intake person, so I'm not looking at it right now. Hopefully, maybe on this chat, I can put my email or I can take a look at it later. Should be self-explanatory, but if you're having trouble, I'll try to help you after this meetup. I don't know about the technical intake of Servas. Become a host or a traveler. Shouldn't be complicated, but as I said, after this, I can try to help you.
Wonderful. So Mike, you can go ahead and reach out to Eric through Meetup, or you can exchange emails, whatever you guys prefer. Last question is from Martin, and then we're going to do our breakout rooms. Martin, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, because my English is not quite good. I'm not English native speaking. I want to say something a little out of this, and then a question to Angela. I think that we are living backwards. I mean, because the kids, I mean, they are because they are they do, and because they do they are, and I think the society that we live it's teach us in the opposite way. I mean. And the question is, I have few, but I wanna make only one. You have which are the issues or the subject that Polymath should work on to be more effective? I mean, you can define some aspect that you should work on it much or more than some others. Some other things that the polymath should, I mean, learn or do or make some kind of work on it. I mean, something that to make better. I don't know if the question is quite well, but and also if it's exists some kind of a project that is some kind of a polymath university or something, and also which are the resource or that everybody use to learn beside internet or something between social media. If you have some other aspect that you prefer to develop the polymathy or something that you have, only that. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Martin. Good to see you. I think what you were asking is, what should polymaths work on to be effective polymaths? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. I would say, it depending on the person, sort of what their strengths and challenges and areas for growth are, the answer might be different. But I think in general, being open to experience, being curious, being committed to continual lifelong learning, those are the most important elements, I would say, of being polymathic. So it takes some self-awareness, I guess, to sort of look inside and work through the challenge, because it's not necessarily easy to be open, right? Like that takes some courage, like we talked about. It takes some introspection, some self-curation. You know, it's a journey. It doesn't all have to happen at once. Like this is a life project in a way, to live as a polymath. And you asked also about resources. I mentioned a few, but Polymath Place on Facebook is a good one. And Polymath Place on YouTube is another. Range by David Epstein, The Polymath by Waqas Ahmed. Those are some good ones. There are some other books. Emily Wapnick has a book called How to Be Everything. She has a website, The Putty Tribe. I think she's changing the name of that, but she has quite a community. Dustin probably knows even more resources and is compiling them. Dustin, do you want to add anything here?
Just real quick, because I'm working right now on my OmniContent mini-series called the Multidisciplinary Spectrum, where I'm talking about each of these different terms. And in my research of those terms, I did all kinds of different websites like Google or Bing and YouTube and podcasts, and I collected hundreds of links for each of the kind of polymathic resources online. And on the finale, I'm putting a list of all the resources down so people can literally look at what I looked at. Basically, all of the online content around polymathy.
Yeah, my dissertation too. I mean, it is an academic text, but I think it's fairly readable. And oh, I forgot to mention too, forgive my self-promotion, but if you go to Amazon.com, I have a journal for polymathic people where there are some questions and some prompts to help you on your journey to be very thoughtful about it. So I made that journal to try to help people on this journey. I also made some t-shirts with the Polymath Place logo. No pressure to buy any of these. My dissertation is also available on Amazon if you want a hard copy. The digital version is available for free online. So those are some additional resources if you would like to pursue them.
Wonderful.
Shameless plugs, yes.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Dustin. And thank you, Eric. Eric, I love your stories. Dustin, I love your creativity in trying to put things together. And Angela is always amazing as usual. So now what we're going to do is that what we try to do is that we're trying to actually build a community here. On Wednesdays, we do Comprehensivist Wednesdays, which is equivalent to Polymaths. Coming Wednesday, we have a very special evening where we are inviting everybody to talk about their own interest. Because what we found is that teaching, as Eric was pointing out, teaching is the best way of learning. So teach us about what you're studying for 5 minutes, and each person, and you will hear amazing things being talked about. So that's on Wednesday at 9 p.m. All right, so I'm starting the breakout room so we can discuss the ideas presented here. And then we'll come back into this main room and you'll get to share your takeaways. What are you walking away with? I'm starting the breakout rooms now.
That was interesting.
Yes, that's, people like the breakout rooms quite a bit because it's a good way of having a deep conversation. So it's kind of combination of putting things down on the table during the presentation time and discussing it, and then coming back and people talking about what are they walking away with. All right, welcome back, Angela, Eric, Dustin, and everybody else. So it's time for takeaways. So I'm going to call on people in the order in which I see them on Zoom. You get to talk about what are you walking away with from this meetup. All right, you can take up to 1 minute or so. And we'll go through. If you do not want to share your takeaways, just type skip in the chat and I will skip you. Next up is Eric, Jeff, and Barry. Alice, go ahead. You need to unmute yourself.
It should be in the lower left.
Yes.
There we go. Yep. It didn't work the first time. Yes. Well, I'm walking away with a whole bunch of new friends who apparently are in some way family members. So that's wonderful. And also some pen pals. This has been amazingly energizing. The resources that I was unaware of are how I'm going to be spending the rest of my day. I really appreciate everyone sharing their experiences and what they have come across so generously. It is, I typed earlier in the chat that it's like a tribe, and it feels very, I don't know, reassuring, I guess, that I'm always the weird one, but now I'm not the only one. So thank you all very much. And the problem with things like this is now I've seen all of the follow-on 52 living ideas. Now I'm going to be in webinars every single night. But you won't,
That's a problem?
Yeah, I was going to say, you won't hear me complaining, but I may forget to eat.
Wonderful.
Thank you,
Well,
Bob.
you're welcome, Alice. And next up is Jeff, Barry, and Deborah K. Jeff, go ahead. Jeff Nugent.
Yes, had to unmute there, Shrikant. So, so Alice, welcome. And I met a number of you in the smaller groups. Welcome. One of the things that struck us in the smaller group is something that I'm reminded of recently, as especially Laura was talking, that the secret of genius is to carry the spirit of the child into old age. And my experience with my children and with myself as a child is a great deal of curiosity and not being expert about very much, but just kind of interest and almost a sort of a natural syntopic approach to everything, because that's all you got is comparing other things to whatever's in front of you. And so I want to take that to heart and continue to apply that in all the things we're doing right now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jeff, as always. Next up is Barry, Deborah K, and Bela. Barry, go ahead.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Yes, I think I learned what I suspected was already the truth, that the path to polymath is different for different people. And in my case, it was through trauma rather than through, and I'm a natural polymath, but I tried to be a monomath. And I become a poet, an artist, a dancer, a writer, and that room you see behind me is my creative room. I made it into a garden where I do yoga, I do art, I do play the piano, and I write. I found that in the case of a polymath, that in my case, that your environment very much influences how you exercise your polymathy. I came to it through trauma rather than through, in other words, I tried to be a monomath, and I was an engineer for 30, 40 years, became a power engineer, have a master's in electrical engineering, but then I found that this fragmented me. So I want to leave this thought to you, that really polymath is the route or the path to longevity to increase lifespan as well as health span. In other words, if you read all the books, and I have a YouTube video about this, that the key to long life and healthy life is keeping yourself interested in many things and trying different things, which is the basic purpose of polymathy.
Wonderful, Barry. Couldn't agree more. Wonderful. Next up is Deborah K, Bela, and Jacinto.
Hello there. I'm using my little iPod. So anyway, I consider myself in that category of being like a polymath personality. And I want to encourage everyone to embrace it because it's wonderful to be different and unique. You don't have to fit into a little box. And personally, I hate being in boxes. So I'm very comfortable being different. And also, as a teacher, I want to encourage everyone and remind you that you're not going to learn everything in your formal education that you would like to know. And we teach you how to learn. So please pursue whatever you want to learn. Don't let anything stop you. And that's what I want you to remember from us as teachers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Deborah. Deborah has done a beautiful video on how do you inculcate love of learning in children. By the way, we have more than 32 videos on polymathy on 52 Living Ideas YouTube channel, a total of about close to 200 videos. We publish videos of these meetups. So there are a number of videos on this theme from art angle, science angle, architecture angle, all kinds of angles. So I invite you to check that out. Next up is Bela, Brian, and Francoise. Bela, go ahead.
Hello. So as I shared with my breakout room group, so I'm an instructor of literature and writing in a college, and I also recently started coaching women who are polymathic because I felt like I really would have liked to have sort of that coach and that guidance. And, as I was sort of making my path and figuring things out and even finding out what it meant to be either you want to call it a Renaissance woman or a polymath. So one of the things that I found specifically very intriguing is the correlation between the artist and the polymath, especially because I have very artistic leanings, and my background, my MFA is in creative writing, and so I had suspicions that there were those correlations, and I like to hear about that. Also, one thing that came to mind is I also think highly sensitive people, that might be a correlation as well. And I guess something I'd love to leave you with is someone had mentioned a question in our breakout group. Is it good or bad to be a polymath? And so I look at it and, I talk to my clients about it as being a polymath is just a circumstance. It's who I am. And then I get to decide if it's good or bad and what I'm going to make it mean. So thank you.
Thank you, Bela, and welcome. I think I skipped Jacinto. I don't know how to pronounce your name, sir. Go ahead. Jacinto?
It's fine. Shrikant?
Yes.
Shrikant?
Shrikant, yes. Go ahead, sir.
Well, I was in the room with Jeff, so he summed up what we were discussing, the inner child. Basically sticking to this inner child throughout one's life. So I would just highlight his point because I loved it. And given I'm speaking, thank you everybody.
Thank you.
For this thing.
Thank you. Next up is Brian, Francoise, and Joe. Brian, go ahead.
Okay, just briefly. I enjoyed today's session. I've been listening to these sessions on comprehensivism and polymaths on these meetings for a few months now. Never really having heard the term before. All I would say is that today's session brought an immense amount of clarity for me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brian. Next up is Francoise, Joe, and Lori.
Hi. I didn't know until today that I was a polymath, so it's a big discovery, and it feels good to see so many people in the same kind of category. But what it makes me feel, I don't know if the reference is easy for you, but in France, we have Molière and the bourgeois gentilhomme who's so happy to discover that he's talking in prose, and he never knew that he was speaking in prose. And I'm in the same kind of a cloud where I never thought I was a polymath.
Wonderful, wonderful. Next up is Joe, Laurie, and Judith. Joe, go ahead.
I want to thank the panel again for presenting this afternoon. It was fantastic. It was, I very much appreciate it. The things that I'm going to take away from this is how a polymath defines failure. And the idea of failure is not to try. And, you know, I think that that's really an important lesson to take away as far as living, also relates to living an authentic life to a certain degree. I also find that the importance of the other takeaway is the importance of firsthand experience through Eric's travels, you know, to have a broader perspective on the world, to really truly integrate everybody's perspective. I really feel that maps into the idea of comprehensivism as well. When you're trying to think of the problems of the world in general, that's part of the comprehensivist approach. You're kind of looking at it, you know, the whole universe per se. So I think that that's that firsthand experience is very important. So those are the major takeaways that I have, and I thank you again to the panel.
Thanks, Joe. Next up is Julie, Judith, and Kevin. Julie, go ahead.
It seems to me that a polymath is someone who has got extreme curiosity by nature, who honors it at all times and is able to shift without letting any of the fears or society stop him. And so really just embodies freedom, and that I think that in me honoring myself at this late age, I am just so grateful for this meetups and this wonderful, energizing, stimulating environment of viewpoints, because I feel like I'm honoring myself and following this, and this will get me into the solution instead of being in the problem where I was staying with the same people that had no interest in these things. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you. Next up is Judith, Kevin, and Martin. Judith, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm kind of happy to follow up from what Julie was saying, because on the one hand, I feel very intimidated by the resumes of all the polymaths that were described. But on the other hand, I really feel that all of us here are somewhere on the spectrum that Angela described, because we're here for no other reason than we're open and curious and want to learn. And that is an element of polymathy, and it's not in our, you know, it's not serving our jobs per se, it's just our interest. And I think we are all, you know, appreciative. I noticed, I just jotted down like what Jeff's mentioned, curiosity. Barry talked about the key to longevity. I couldn't agree more. Deborah was talking about being, or I think it was Deborah, different and unique, and that has value. And I agree with all those things. And I feel, you know, encouraged that although I might not have I might lack the structure and everything, those things that are needed to actually have accomplishments to put on a resume, I still feel that I'm constantly seeking and gathering and learning throughout my life. And so I feel that has value. And so I'm happy to be somewhere on that spectrum. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Next up is Kevin, Martin, and B.
Yes, thank you, Shranka, and panelists, everyone else. Like, polymath is about for me, right? Polymath is about curiosity and learning something new, learning others' perspective, and enrich your own life. End of the day, we all serve the same. The conclusion same, all the best for yourself and everyone else.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Martin, B, and Mike. Martin.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you, everybody, again. And what I see I can extract is that it's difficult to identify polymathy, but it's easy to identify a polymath guy or girl. I mean, maybe to all of us, it's difficult to understand, put all the pieces together, but when you see the other telling the story, you can identify easier than when you try to put an intellectual aspect of what you feel or what you think about polymathy. That is one. And the other thing, I think polymathy is the future. It's the next 20 years from humanity. I think that we are going to have, with what we have, there we are, and with the things that we have, in the moment that we are, and in the place that we are, and not more than that. And the innovation and creativity are going to be fundamental, in my point of view, to survive as humans or to die as humans. Besides that, in my point of view, in my case, it's I put in the places that I am uncomfortable to learn, because when I'm comfortable, I can't learn. If I put in an environment that are not comfortable, let's say not a day at the beach, I can learn much more faster and better. And also the last thing I want to say, it's as I said before, as the kids we be because we do, and because we do, we are. And as adults, we do the opposite. I mean, we want to have a lot of money, let's say, and we want to have money to do things as a millionaire, let's say, and because of that turns in a millionaire person, let's put in a stupid, silly way.
Very nice.
But we live in the opposite way of what we should. That is, thank you of everyone. Yeah. I'm very glad to participate here.
Thank you.
Nothing
Thank
more.
you, Martin. That was great. Next up is Mike. Mike. So it's going to be Mike, followed by Dustin and Eric. Mike, what's your takeaway?
My takeaway, now that we can all aspire to be polymathic, we have been given an expansive toolbox for living an authentic and meaningful life. And I'm looking forward to trying to apply all this good stuff.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Mike. Dustin, what's your takeaway?
I'm just happy to meet a lot more polymathic people. And so, like we keep saying on here, having this tribe of people that we all agree with and understand, like, hey, we may not be polymaths in the same niche or same niches per se, but we're all very divergent thinking and multidisciplinary, and I'm excited about that.
Wonderful. Eric, what's your takeaway?
I'm surprised and delighted to see Angela here to discover Shrikant and 52 Living Ideas, and to know that my teaching in 1999, like my son, 13-year-old son likes to call it, back in my century, had something to do with the naming, the creation of something called polymathy, which I never heard of until Angela told me about it when she was working on her dissertation. And this is the most I've heard about it right now today. So I feel like I had something to do with it. And life is surprising that way. Like I said, planting seeds as a teacher, they grow far beyond the classroom. And if one puts oneself out there in the world in passionate, committed ways, one never knows, do one, as Fats Waller, the blues piano player, said. And I think that's good enough, fellow polymaths.
Wonderful.
You can track me down. I put my email and the link to my travel podcast in the chat room. I hope maybe we all stay in touch.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. It was an honor and a delight. I think your sheer kind of enthusiasm and gusto for life and the courage is inspiring. So that's what human beings need more of. That's wonderful. Thank you. Angela, what's your takeaway?
My heart feels full right now. Eric, it has been such a delight to reunite with you here today. Eric and I had been in a little bit of touch after I finished my dissertation, and I just wanted to thank him. Actually, you're written about near the end in the final comments, Eric, where I gave you credit for planting the seed that you did. So you really did make an impact on my life. And I'm just so excited to know Dustin now. He's such a mover and shaker in this field, and so excited to see more people joining this kind of conversation. So my takeaway is just a sense of excitement. There's going to be 9 more of these talks every other Sunday, same time. So this was just one of 10 talks. So I hope to see more of you at future ones.
Wonderful. So let me again reiterate what's coming up. We have 9 talks with Angela every other Sunday, pretty much from now on. Number 2, the most important one is your participation. So you talking about your own ideas, you'll find that you will get a lot more from these meetups by talking about your ideas. And that's going to be this Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern time. Next Saturday, we're going to be talking about ideas of Buckminster Fuller on synergy and polymath comprehensive. He calls it comprehensive approach to life, and which creates synergy, the kind of synergy that Eric was talking about of, every action that you take, it produces all kinds of good effects, which you don't necessarily see immediately. So that's coming up on Saturday. And then we're going to be going through the book Range, which is a very famous book. We're going to have a presentation and discussion of that. So all of that is coming up. We do Comprehensivist Wednesdays every Wednesday and every other Sunday. All right. So thank you with that. Thank you very much. And Angela, this was just delightful, and look forward to this. This is a great start to a great series.